At the wedding ceremony, my daughter-in-law decided to pull a prank on me. She poured 2 liters of garbage juice with leftovers all over my dress. Everyone laughed at me, even my son. But when the hall doors opened and someone said 3 words, the whole room was in shock. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I spent 3 months looking for the perfect dress. 3 months walking through department stores, browsing online shops, trying on dozens of options that either didn't fit right or cost more than I could afford. My budget was tight, always had been, but this was my son's wedding. I wanted to look presentable. I wanted Clayton to be proud to introduce me as his mother. The dress I finally chose was a soft lavender shade, modest but elegant, with delicate lace sleeves that covered the age spots on my arms. It cost $240, which meant I'd have to skip a few dinners out and cut back on groceries for the month. But when I looked at myself in the mirror at the store, I saw someone who belonged at a wedding, someone worthy of being there. I should have known better. The ceremony itself was beautiful. The venue was this gorgeous estate in the countryside, with sprawling gardens and a white gazebo draped in flowers. I sat in the 3rd row, not the front where mothers usually sit, but I told myself it didn't matter. Esme had a large family, and they needed the space. That's what Clayton said when he called to tell me about the seating arrangements. I watched my son stand at the altar, looking handsome in his dark suit, and my chest swelled with something between pride and sadness. I raised him alone after his father walked out when Clayton was 8 years old. 23 years of just the 2 of us. I worked double shifts as a nurse, took extra weekend hours, did everything I could to give him a good life. And here he was, getting married, starting a new chapter. Esme walked down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my car. She was beautiful, I had to admit that. Tall, blonde, with this confident smile that said she knew exactly how stunning she looked. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, I felt this strange tightness in my stomach, like my body was trying to warn me about something my mind hadn't figured out yet. They said their vows. They kissed. Everyone clapped. I clapped too, even though my hands felt heavy. The reception was held in the grand ballroom inside the estate. Round tables with white tablecloths, centerpieces of roses and baby's breath, a live band playing soft music. I found my table, number 18, near the back by the kitchen doors. Clayton and Esme sat at the head table with the wedding party, laughing and toasting with champagne that sparkled in crystal glasses. I sat alone at my table for a while. The other seats were filled with people I didn't know, Esme's distant relatives who spoke to each other but not to me. I picked at the salmon on my plate, took small sips of water, and tried to look content. Then Esme stood up. She tapped her glass with a fork, the sharp sound cutting through the conversation. Everyone turned to look at her. She was smiling, that wide, perfect smile she always wore. "I want to thank you all for being here on our special day," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "Clayton and I are so grateful for your love and support, and I have a special surprise for someone very important." She looked directly at me. My heart jumped. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe she wanted to thank me, to acknowledge me publicly. Maybe this was her way of making peace. "Clayton's mother, Harriet, has been so supportive throughout our relationship," Esme continued, walking toward my table. Several people were filming on their phones now, capturing what they thought would be a sweet moment. And I wanted to do something to show my appreciation. She was carrying something, a large metal bucket that one of the groomsmen handed to her. I could see liquid sloshing inside, dark and thick. I started to stand, thinking maybe it was some kind of toast or presentation, but Esme moved faster. She lifted the bucket and poured the contents directly over my head. The smell hit me first. Rotting food, spoiled milk, something acidic and nauseating that made my eyes water. Cold liquid soaked through my hair, ran down my face, drenched my beautiful lavender dress. Chunks of something unidentifiable slid down my shoulders. Garbage juice mixed with leftover food scraps, coffee grounds, something that might have been fruit peels. The room erupted in laughter. Not polite chuckles or nervous giggles. Full, loud laughter. People doubled over, slapping tables, pointing at me. Phone cameras flashed. Someone shouted, "Oh my God, that's hilarious!" Another voice called out, "Best wedding prank ever!" I stood there frozen, dripping with filth, unable to move or speak. My brain couldn't process what had just happened. The dress I'd saved for, the hair I'd spent an hour styling that morning, the dignity I'd tried so hard to maintain, all of it destroyed in seconds. And then I heard it, his voice. Clayton was laughing, not just a polite laugh to go along with his bride. He was genuinely amused, his phone out, recording me as I stood there covered in garbage. His face was flushed with laughter, tears forming at the corners of his eyes. That's when something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet snap, like a thread pulled too tight finally giving way. Esme stepped back, admiring her work. "It's just a joke, Harriet," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't be so sensitive. It's all in good fun." Good fun. The words echoed in my head as I felt something sticky sliding down my back. Good fun. As if humiliating a 64-year-old woman at her son's wedding was entertainment. I looked at Clayton, really looked at him, hoping to see some trace of the boy I'd raised. The boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The boy I'd held when he cried over his first heartbreak. The boy I'd sacrificed everything for. But all I saw was a stranger laughing at his mother's humiliation. My hands trembled as I reached up to wipe my face, but there was nowhere clean to wipe. Everything was covered in slime. The smell was overwhelming, making my stomach churn. I could feel all those eyes on me, all those phones pointed in my direction, capturing my lowest moment to share with the world. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of there before I completely fell apart in front of everyone. But my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed by shock, by betrayal, by a pain so deep it felt physical. A woman at a nearby table, someone I didn't recognize, leaned over to her companion and whispered, "Who pranks their mother-in-law like that?" But she was smiling when she said it, like it was outrageous but entertaining. The band had stopped playing. The room was filled with the sound of laughter, conversation, people rehashing what they'd just witnessed. Already I could hear them making it into a story they'd tell later. You should have seen it. The bride completely doused her mother-in-law in garbage. Esme walked back to the head table, accepting high fives from some of the groomsmen. Clayton put his arm around her, still grinning, still not looking at me with anything resembling concern or remorse. I finally found my voice. Clayton. It came out as barely a whisper. He didn't hear me. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. I tried again, louder. Clayton. This time he glanced over, his smile fading just slightly. "Mom, relax. It's just a joke. You'll laugh about this later. Laugh about this later." As if there was any universe where I would find this funny. I felt something wet on my cheeks and realized I was crying, tears mixing with the garbage juice on my face. I was crying in front of all these people, giving them even more to laugh about. That's when I turned and walked toward the exit, each step making wet squishing sounds from my ruined shoes. People moved out of my way, some still giggling, others looking vaguely uncomfortable now that the initial shock had worn off. I pushed through the doors into the hallway, leaving behind the laughter, the music, the celebration. My celebration, supposedly. The day I was supposed to gain a daughter. I made it to the bathroom and caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was almost unrecognizable. Garbage dripped from her hair, stained her dress, covered her face. She looked defeated. She looked exactly like someone whose own son had just laughed at her pain. I gripped the edge of the sink, my knuckles turning white. Behind me, I could still hear the muffled sounds of the reception continuing. They'd moved on already. The band was playing again. Life was going on. But mine felt like it had just stopped. I didn't know it then, but everything was about to change. Because at that exact moment, as I stood in that bathroom trying to clean garbage off my dress with paper towels, the main doors to the ballroom were opening again. And someone was about to say 3 words that would change everything. I stood in that bathroom for maybe 20 minutes trying to make myself presentable, but it was impossible. The smell wouldn't wash off. The stains wouldn't come out. I gave up and just sat on the closed toilet lid, my ruined dress sticking to my skin, and let myself remember how we got here. Esme came into Clayton's life 3 years ago. He met her at some networking event for young professionals, one of those mixers where ambitious people in expensive clothes drink wine and exchange business cards. He called me the next day, excited in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, I met someone. She's incredible, successful, beautiful, confident. Everything I've been looking for." I was happy for him. Of course I was. My son was 31 years old, and I'd started to worry he'd never find someone. He'd had a few relationships over the years, but nothing serious. Nothing that lasted. "When do I get to meet her?" I asked. "Soon," he promised. "Let me make sure this is real first." Soon turned into 2 months, then 3. Finally, he invited me to dinner at a restaurant I couldn't normally afford, the kind of place where they don't list prices on the menu. I wore my best outfit, the black pantsuit I'd bought for job interviews 10 years ago, and arrived 15 minutes early because I was nervous. Clayton and Esme were already seated when I walked in. She looked me up and down with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not hostile exactly, but assessing. Measuring. Deciding if I passed some unspoken test. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Clayton's told me so much about you. Please, call me Harriet." I shook her hand, noting how cold her fingers felt. "It's wonderful to finally meet you." The dinner was polite but strained. Esme asked me questions that felt less like genuine interest and more like an interview. What did I do for work? Where did I live? What were my hobbies? Each answer seemed to disappoint her slightly, though she never said anything directly. When I mentioned I was a nurse, she said, "Oh, how noble. That must be exhausting work." But her tone suggested she thought it was beneath her somehow. When I told her I lived in a small apartment on the east side of town, she nodded slowly. "Cozy," she said, which I learned later was her word for cramped and insufficient. Clayton barely spoke during that dinner. He just watched us both, like he was waiting to see if we'd get along. I tried so hard to be likable, to be the kind of mother-in-law she could appreciate. I complimented her dress, her career, her taste in restaurants. I asked about her family, her childhood, her plans for the future. She answered everything with brief, polite responses that shut down any real conversation. At the end of the night, when Clayton went to get the car, Esme leaned across the table. Her smile was still in place, but her eyes had changed. "I'm sure you understand that Clayton and I are building a life together," she said quietly. "A very specific kind of life. We both have ambitions, plans for our future. We can't have anything holding us back." I didn't understand what she meant then. I thought maybe she was just nervous about meeting me, about making a good impression. I smiled and said, "Of course, I just want Clayton to be happy." "Good," she said, sitting back as Clayton pulled up outside. "As long as we understand each other." That should have been my first warning, but I was so desperate for my son to have a happy relationship, so eager to be included in his life, that I ignored the cold knot forming in my stomach. The pattern started slowly. First, it was the forgotten invitations. Clayton would mention a dinner party they were hosting, and I'd wait for my invitation. It never came. When I asked about it, Esme would say, "Oh, did Clayton not tell you? It was just for his work colleagues, nothing personal." But I'd see the photos on social media later. Friends from college, neighbors, even Clayton's old roommate from his early 20s. Everyone except me. Then came the comments about my age. Never direct insults, just observations that landed like small cuts. 64 is such an interesting age, isn't it, Harriet? Not quite elderly, but not exactly young anymore. Or, "I'm so glad Clayton had a mother who was willing to sacrifice her own youth to raise him. That must have been difficult, being alone for so long." She made it sound like my life was a tragedy, something to pity rather than respect. I tried to build a relationship with her anyway. I'd call her, suggest lunch dates, offer to help with wedding planning. She always had an excuse. Too busy with work, already made plans. The wedding planner had everything under control. The few times we did spend together, she'd find subtle ways to exclude me from conversations. If I shared a story about Clayton's childhood, she'd change the subject. If I offered advice based on my experience, she'd smile and say, "That's one perspective, but things are different now." Clayton noticed none of this. Or if he did, he chose to ignore it. Whenever I tried to talk to him about how Esme made me feel, he'd get defensive. "Mom, you're being paranoid. Esme likes you. She's just not as openly affectionate as you might want. That's her personality. She forgot to invite me to your birthday dinner last month." That was my fault, not hers. I forgot to tell her you were coming. She told me my gift for Christmas was inappropriate. Well, Mom, we did ask for specific things on our registry. You can't get mad when people are honest about what they need. The gift had been a handmade quilt I'd spent 3 months creating. I'd stitched in squares representing important moments from Clayton's life. His first day of school, the camping trip we took when he was 12, his college graduation. I thought it would be meaningful, something they could keep forever. Esme opened it at their Christmas party in front of all their friends. She held it up, examined it with this puzzled expression, and said, "How? Rustic. Where exactly would we display this?" Everyone laughed. Not cruelly, exactly, but like they were all in on some joke I didn't understand. The joke was me. The unsophisticated mother who didn't know that handmade gifts weren't appropriate for people like them. Clayton thanked me later, in private, but I never saw the quilt again. I assumed it went straight to Goodwill. The worst part was how she intercepted my relationship with my son. I'd call Clayton's phone and Esme would answer. "Oh, Harriet, Clayton's in the shower. Can I help you with something?" Or, "He's really busy with work right now. Maybe try calling next week?" My weekly phone calls with Clayton, a tradition we'd maintained since he moved out at 22, became monthly, then sporadic, then practically non-existent. I told myself I was being sensitive, that I needed to give them space, that every mother goes through this when their child gets married. But deep down, I knew. Esme was erasing me. Slowly, methodically, she was removing me from Clayton's life, and he was letting her do it. 6 months before the wedding, I got a call from Clayton. He sounded uncomfortable. "Mom, Esme and I have been talking about the wedding ceremony, about who walks me down the aisle and all that." My heart sank. "What about it?" "Well, traditionally, the mother of the groom doesn't have a huge role, right? We thought maybe you could do a reading during the ceremony. Something from the Bible or a poem." "A reading," I repeated, my throat tight. "Yeah, Esme's mom is doing one too. It'll be nice. You'll both be involved." What he didn't say, what hung in the air between us, was that I wouldn't be sitting in the front row. I wouldn't be escorted down the aisle. I wouldn't be acknowledged as the person who raised him alone for 23 years. I agreed to the reading because what else could I do? Refuse and be labeled as difficult? Make a scene and prove Esme's point that I was overly emotional? But it hurt. God, it hurt. Because I knew this was Esme's doing. She wanted to minimize my presence, make me just another guest rather than the mother of the groom. The wedding planning continued without me. I wasn't consulted on anything. Not the venue, the flowers, the menu, the guest list, nothing. I learned about decisions after they'd already been made, through brief, informational calls from Clayton. We chose a lavender and white color scheme. The wedding's in September. "We're having salmon and chicken for dinner options." Never. "What do you think, Mom?" Or, "We'd love your input." Just facts, delivered like items on a checklist. I bought that lavender dress thinking at least I'd match the wedding colors. At least I'd look like I belonged there. I should have known better. Sitting in that bathroom, garbage still dripping from my hair, I finally understood. Esme didn't just dislike me. She hated me. She saw me as an obstacle to the perfect life she was creating with Clayton. And tonight, in front of everyone, she'd made sure I knew exactly where I stood. The door to the bathroom opened. I quickly wiped my eyes, trying to compose myself, but it was just another guest, a young woman in a blue dress who took one look at me and gasped, "Oh my God, are you okay? What happened?" I couldn't find the words. What was I supposed to say? My son's bride humiliated me as a joke and everyone laughed. The woman's face softened with understanding. I saw what happened out there. That was horrible. I'm so sorry." Her kindness, from a complete stranger, broke something open in me. Fresh tears started falling, and I couldn't stop them. "Is there someone I can call for you?" she asked gently. "Family? A friend?" I shook my head. There wasn't anyone. I'd spent so many years focused on Clayton, working overtime to support him, sacrificing my own social life, that I'd let my friendships fade. My siblings lived in other states, and we'd grown distant over the years. I was alone in this. "The party's still going," she said quietly. "But if I were you, I'd leave. You don't deserve this." She was right. I didn't deserve this. But the problem was, I didn't know how to leave. Not just the reception, but this whole situation, this relationship where I kept giving and giving and getting nothing but contempt in return. I stood up, looking at my reflection one more time. The woman in the mirror looked defeated, broken. Exactly what Esme wanted me to be. But then something shifted in my chest. A small spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. Not the explosive kind, but cold and clear. Esme thought she'd won. She thought she'd put me in my place, shown everyone that I didn't matter. And maybe she had, but I wasn't going to let her see me broken. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and walked out of that bathroom. My dress was ruined, my dignity in tatters, but I was walking out on my own terms. I made it to the parking lot, found my car, and sat in the driver's seat. My hands shook as I tried to put the key in the ignition. The smell from the garbage was overwhelming in the enclosed space. That's when I heard it. Raised voices coming from the direction of the ballroom. Not laughter anymore. Something else. Shouting. Commotion. I sat there, keys in hand, trying to decide if I should drive away and never look back. But before I could make that decision, the ballroom doors burst open, and everything changed. I sat frozen in my car, keys still in my hand, watching the ballroom doors. Something was happening inside. The music had stopped again. I could hear voices, but not clearly enough to make out words. Just the tone, urgent and tense. Part of me wanted to drive away. Just start the engine and leave this whole nightmare behind. But another part of me, the part that had spent 3 decades being a mother, needed to know if Clayton was okay. I know how that sounds. After what he'd just done, after he'd laughed at my humiliation, I still worried about him. That's what years of being someone's only parent does to you. It becomes instinct, wired so deep you can't just turn it off. I opened the car door and stepped back out into the warm September evening. My shoes squelched with each step, leaving wet marks on the pavement. I must have looked insane, walking back toward the reception covered in garbage, but I didn't care anymore. Something was pulling me back. As I got closer to the entrance, I could hear more clearly. A woman's voice, commanding and sharp, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. What happened here? Those 3 words. Simple, direct, but loaded with such authority that even from outside I could feel the shift in atmosphere. I pushed through the entrance doors, staying in the shadows of the hallway. From there, I could see into the ballroom without being immediately visible. What I saw made me stop breathing for a moment. Standing in the center of the room was an older woman, maybe in her early 70s, dressed in an elegant navy suit. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and she carried herself like someone accustomed to being listened to. She held a leather traveling bag in one hand, suggesting she'd just arrived. The room had gone completely silent. The laughter from earlier had evaporated. Guests stood frozen, some still holding their phones from when they'd been recording my humiliation, others with champagne glasses halfway to their lips. Esme stood near the head table, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "Mother," Esme said, her voice unnaturally high. "You're here. I thought you were still in London." "Clearly," the woman said, her voice dripping with ice. She set down her bag and surveyed the room with eyes that missed nothing. "I was, but I cut my trip short when I realized the date. My only daughter's wedding. Did you really think I wouldn't come?" Clayton stood up from his seat, looking between Esme and this woman who I now realized must be Margaret, Esme's mother. I'd never met her. Esme had told Clayton her mother was traveling abroad for work and couldn't make it to the wedding. She'd said it so casually, like it was a minor inconvenience rather than a mother missing her daughter's wedding day. "Mrs. Whitmore," Clayton started, attempting a smile. "It's wonderful that you could make it after all." Margaret didn't even glance at him. Her eyes were fixed on something near the side table where I'd been sitting. The table where the bucket had been. The table where garbage juice now pooled on the white tablecloth, dripping onto the floor. "I asked a question," Margaret said, her voice quiet but somehow more frightening than if she'd shouted. "What happened here?" No one answered. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and thick. I saw guests exchanging glances, some looking guilty now, others confused about why the atmosphere had shifted so dramatically. Margaret's eyes swept the room until they landed on me, still standing in the doorway. I watched her take in my appearance, the ruined dress, the stains, the way I was dripping onto the floor. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. "You," she said, pointing at a young man near the front, one of the groomsmen who'd handed Esme the bucket earlier. "Tell me what happened." The groomsman shifted uncomfortably. "It was just a prank, ma'am. A joke. We were all just having fun." "A joke," Margaret repeated flatly. "I see. And the victim of this joke, where is she?" Esme finally spoke up, attempting to regain control. "Mother, you're making a big deal out of nothing. It was harmless. Everyone's been laughing about it." "Everyone," Margaret said, turning to face her daughter fully. "Show me the video." "What? The video? I saw at least 20 phones recording. Someone show me what happened." The room remained silent. No one moved. They'd all been eager to record my humiliation, to share it later as a funny wedding story. But now with Margaret standing there radiating disapproval, suddenly no one wanted to be the first to show her. "Now," Margaret said, and the command in that single word made a young woman near the front fumble with her phone. She held it up, and Margaret took it from her hands. The room was so quiet I could hear the video playing, heard the laughter, heard Esme's voice saying, "It's just a joke, Harriet. Don't be so sensitive." Margaret watched the entire thing without expression. Then she watched it again. Finally, she handed the phone back and turned to face the room. "That woman," she said, pointing toward where I stood in the doorway, "is the mother of the groom, the woman who raised the man my daughter just married. And you all thought it was funny to watch her be humiliated, to watch her be degraded at what should have been a celebration. Some guests had the decency to look ashamed now. Others still seemed confused about why this was such a big deal." Margaret walked across the room, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor, until she stood directly in front of Esme. "Is this who you've become?" she asked quietly. "Is this the person I raised?" Esme's face flushed red. "You don't understand. She's been difficult, always inserting herself where she's not wanted, always trying to control Clayton. I was just putting her in her place." "Her place," Margaret repeated. "And where exactly is her place, Esme?" "Not here," Esme snapped, and for a moment the mask slipped completely. The sweet, composed bride disappeared, revealing something uglier underneath. "Not in our lives, not interfering with our marriage. Clayton is mine now, not hers." The words hung in the air like poison. I saw Clayton flinch, saw him open his mouth like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Margaret's expression remained calm, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched at her sides. "I owe you an apology," she said, but she wasn't looking at Esme. She was looking at me. She crossed the room until she stood in front of me. Up close, I could see the lines around her eyes, the careful makeup, the pearls at her throat. She looked like old money, the kind of woman who knew exactly what proper behavior looked like. "My name is Margaret Whitmore," she said, extending her hand. "I'm deeply sorry for what my daughter has done to you. This is inexcusable." I shook her hand, still too stunned to fully process what was happening. Her grip was firm, warm, completely different from Esme's cold touch that first night at dinner. "I'm Harriet," I managed to say. Morrison, Clayton's mother. I gathered that, Margaret said gently. I've heard a great deal about you, though clearly not the truth. She turned back to face the room, still standing beside me. I was told that Clayton's mother was difficult, that she was overbearing and controlling, that she couldn't accept that her son was grown and getting married. But what I see here is a woman who showed up to celebrate her son's wedding and was treated with cruelty and contempt. Esme moved toward us, her face tight with anger. Mother, you're embarrassing me. This is my wedding day. You embarrassed yourself, Margaret said sharply. Do you have any idea what you've done? Not just to this woman, but to your reputation. To this family's name? Our family's name? Esme laughed bitterly. You mean your name, your precious reputation. That's all you've ever cared about. No, Margaret said quietly. What I care about is character, integrity, treating people with basic human decency. Values I apparently failed to instill in you. I watched this exchange feeling like I was in some sort of dream. This woman, this stranger, was defending me. More than that, she was holding her own daughter accountable. When was the last time anyone had stood up for me like this? Clayton finally found his voice. Mrs. Whitmore, I think maybe we should all just calm down. It's been a long day. Emotions are running high. Margaret turned to look at him, really look at him, and I saw something in her expression that made my chest tight. Disappointment. Tell me something, Clayton, she said. When your bride poured garbage on your mother, what did you do? He shifted uncomfortably. It was just a prank. I didn't think— You laughed, Margaret interrupted. I saw the video. You recorded it on your phone and you laughed. Clayton's face reddened. It wasn't personal. I was just caught up in the moment. Not personal, Margaret repeated slowly. Your mother was humiliated in front of 100 people, and it wasn't personal. She shook her head, and I could see genuine sadness in her eyes now. I had hoped that my daughter had found a good man, someone with integrity and strength of character. But a good man would have stopped this before it happened. A good man would have protected his mother, not laughed at her pain. The words landed like physical blows. I saw Clayton stumble back slightly, saw the realization dawning on his face that maybe, just maybe, he'd done something terribly wrong. But even then, even with Margaret calling him out in front of everyone, he looked at Esme first, checking her reaction, seeking her approval. That's when I knew. Whatever hold Esme had on my son, it was complete. She'd replaced me so thoroughly that even in this moment, even when confronted with his cruelty, his first instinct was to protect her, not to apologize to me. Margaret must have seen it too. She sighed deeply and turned back to me. Do you have somewhere to go? Someone to call? I nodded, though truthfully I wasn't sure. My apartment was 40 minutes away. I was covered in garbage. I had no one waiting for me at home. Good, Margaret said. Then I suggest you leave. You don't belong here, but not for the reasons my daughter thinks. You don't belong here because you deserve better than this. She reached into her purse and pulled out a card. This is my personal number. Please call me tomorrow. There are things we need to discuss. I took the card, my fingers trembling. Things? Things about my daughter that you should have been told before this wedding ever happened, Margaret said, her voice low enough that only I could hear. Things that might help you understand this isn't your fault, and things that might help you protect yourself going forward. Before I could ask what she meant, she squeezed my hand gently. Go home, Harriet. Get cleaned up. Rest. We'll talk soon. I looked past her at Clayton one more time. He was standing next to Esme now, his arm around her waist, both of them watching me with identical expressions of resentment, as if I was the one who'd ruined their perfect day, as if I was the problem. Maybe I had been wrong to come back inside. Maybe I should have just driven away and never looked back. But as I turned to leave, I heard Margaret's voice ring out one more time. This reception is over. I drove home in a daze, barely registering the roads, the traffic lights, the other cars around me. My apartment felt smaller than usual when I walked in, the silence oppressive after the chaos of the wedding. I stood in the middle of my living room, still in the ruined dress, and didn't know what to do with myself. Eventually, I moved, took off the dress, and threw it directly in the trash. There was no salvaging it. Stood in the shower for 30 minutes, scrubbing my skin until it was raw, washing my hair 3 times until the smell finally started to fade. When I finally stepped out, wrapped in my old bathrobe, I felt hollowed out. Empty. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The laughter, Clayton's face as he recorded me, Esme's smirk, Margaret's arrival, the way the entire room had shifted in an instant, and Margaret's card, sitting on my nightstand, the elegant script, the promise of answers to questions I hadn't even known to ask. The next morning, I called. My hands shook as I dialed, half expecting it to go to voicemail, to discover that Margaret's kindness had been just for show, something that would evaporate in the harsh light of day. She answered on the second ring. "Harriet," she said, and her voice was warm. "I'm glad you called. How are you feeling?" The question, asked with genuine concern, almost broke me. "I've been better." "I imagine so. Listen, I'm staying at the Grand Hotel downtown. Would you be willing to meet me for lunch? There's a quiet restaurant in the lobby. We can talk privately." I agreed before I could overthink it. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from Margaret at a corner table, both of us with untouched cups of coffee in front of us. She looked tired. The perfect composure from yesterday had cracked slightly, revealing someone who'd had as rough a night as I had. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know after yesterday, you probably never want to see anyone connected to that wedding again." "You defended me," I said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Margaret leaned forward, her expression serious. "Harriet, I owe you an explanation. Several explanations, actually. But first, I need you to understand something. What happened yesterday, what my daughter did to you, it wasn't your fault. And it wasn't random." I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. "What do you mean?" Margaret was silent for a moment, seeming to gather her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with something like guilt. "Esme has a pattern. This isn't the first time she's done something like this." My stomach dropped. "What?" "Not the exact same thing," Margaret clarified quickly, "but the pattern is the same. She finds someone who threatens her control, someone she perceives as competition, and she systematically destroys them. Usually emotionally, sometimes socially, always deliberately." I set down my cup, my hands suddenly unsteady. "How long have you known about this?" "Too long," Margaret admitted. "And I'm ashamed to say I enabled it, made excuses, told myself she was just strong-willed, just ambitious, just protecting herself. I wanted to believe my daughter was complicated, not cruel." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. "Esme was married before. Did you know that?" I felt the air leave my lungs. No, Clayton never mentioned it. Because Esme never told him. She was 26. His name was David. Nice man, kind, from a good family. They were married for 18 months before he filed for divorce. Margaret opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. A wedding photo. Esme looked younger but recognizably herself, standing next to a handsome dark-haired man with a genuine smile. "What happened?" I asked. "David had a mother he was close to, Rachel. Wonderful woman, a retired teacher. She adored her son, welcomed Esme into the family with open arms. Within 6 months, Esme had convinced David that his mother was manipulative and controlling, that she was trying to sabotage their marriage. The similarity to my own situation made my chest tighten. Rachel tried to maintain the relationship," Margaret continued. "She called, sent gifts, invited them to dinner. Esme intercepted everything. David's phone, his mail, his email. She told him that Rachel was harassing them. She showed him evidence of his mother trying to turn him against his wife. Evidence she'd fabricated." "That's horrible," I whispered. "It gets worse." Rachel became desperate. She showed up at their house unannounced one day, just wanting to talk to her son. Esme called the police and filed a restraining order, claiming Rachel had threatened her. David believed her. He cut his mother out of his life completely. Margaret's voice cracked slightly. Rachel died 2 years later. Cancer. David found out about it 3 weeks after the funeral, from a cousin who tracked him down. He'd missed everything. The diagnosis, the treatment, the chance to say goodbye, all because he believed my daughter's lies. I felt sick. Is that why he divorced her? Yes. He discovered the truth when he was going through old emails, found messages from his mother that Esme had hidden. He confronted her, and she admitted everything. Said she'd done it because his mother was too involved in their lives, because she needed to be David's priority, not his mother. Margaret closed the folder. He left her immediately, filed for divorce. And Esme learned absolutely nothing from it except that she needed to be more careful next time. And Clayton? Clayton doesn't know any of this. Esme made sure of it. She told him she'd never been married, just had some serious relationships that didn't work out. She learned from her mistakes with David. This time, she was smarter about it. I thought about the past 3 years, the slow erosion of my relationship with Clayton, the way Esme had carefully, methodically pushed me out. She did the same thing to me, I said. The forgotten invitations, the intercepted phone calls, the way she made me look crazy whenever I tried to talk to Clayton about it. I know, Margaret said gently. I suspected it when Esme told me about you. The things she said, the complaints she made, they sounded too familiar. I should have warned you. I should have told Clayton. But I convinced myself that maybe this time would be different, that maybe marriage would change her. Why didn't you come to the wedding? I asked. Esme said you were traveling. Margaret's laugh was bitter. I was in London, yes, but not by choice. Esme told me the wedding was in October, not September. She gave me the wrong date deliberately so I wouldn't be there. But why? You're her mother. Because I'm also the only person who knows the truth about who she really is. And she couldn't risk me talking to you or Clayton before the wedding. She needed to make sure the marriage was legally binding before I could interfere. I tried to process this. You said there were things I should know. Things that would help me protect myself. What did you mean? Margaret hesitated, then pulled out another document from the folder. This is Clayton's financial information, at least what I was able to find. Esme's been managing their accounts since they moved in together last year. I looked at the papers, credit card statements, bank records, loan documents. The numbers made my head spin. Clayton's in debt, Margaret said bluntly. $73,000 in credit card debt, another $45,000 in personal loans, and his savings account is empty. That's not possible, I said. Clayton has a good job. He's always been responsible with money. He was. Until Esme convinced him they needed to invest in their lifestyle. The house they're renting costs $4,000 a month. The car Esme drives, a lease that costs $800 a month. The furniture, the clothes, the vacations, all of it charged on credit cards. Margaret pointed to specific line items. She told him it was necessary for networking, for his career, that they needed to look successful to become successful. And Clayton, wanting to please her, wanting to prove he could provide the lifestyle she wanted, said yes to everything. He never told me any of this, I said, feeling a fresh wave of hurt. Of course not. Because Esme made sure he felt ashamed about his background, about not coming from money. She made him feel like he needed to prove himself worthy of her. And part of that proof meant distancing himself from anything that reminded him of his modest upbringing. Me, I said quietly. I remind him that he came from nothing, that his mother was just a nurse who lived in a small apartment. Exactly. You represent everything Esme wants him to forget. I looked at the documents again. Why are you showing me this? Because Esme is going to bleed him dry, and when there's nothing left to take, she'll move on, just like she did with David. But this time, she's been smarter. This time, she made sure to isolate him completely first, so when she leaves, he'll have no one to turn to. Margaret leaned back in her chair. I'm not going to enable this anymore. I've already told Esme this morning that I'm cutting her off financially. No more trust fund distributions. No more bailouts when she overspends. Nothing. How did she react? About as well as you'd expect. She screamed that I was trying to ruin her life, that I never supported her, that I was a terrible mother. The usual manipulation tactics. Margaret met my eyes. She's going to come after Clayton's money now, his income, and when that's not enough, she's going to start looking for other sources. Which brings me to why I wanted to talk to you. My stomach twisted. What do you mean? Has Clayton ever talked to you about your finances, your retirement savings, any assets you might have? I shook my head. I don't have much. The apartment is rented. My savings account has maybe $5,000. I have a small retirement fund from the hospital, but that's it. Good, Margaret said, and I must have looked confused because she continued. I don't mean good that you don't have money. I mean good that Esme doesn't know about any assets. Because if she did, she'd find a way to convince Clayton that you owed him. That after all the sacrifices he made for you, the least you could do is help them out financially. The idea seemed absurd. Clayton would never ask me for money. I barely have anything. Not yet, Margaret said. But give Esme time. She's patient. She'll plant the seeds. Mention how hard things are. How stressed Clayton is about money. How she wishes they had family support like her friends do. She'll make him feel guilty for not asking you. Then she'll make him feel entitled to whatever you have. I felt cold. How do I stop her? You can't, Margaret said bluntly. Not as long as Clayton is married to her. What you can do is protect yourself. Put your assets somewhere she can't access. Don't tell Clayton about any money you have. Don't lend them anything, no matter how desperate the situation seems. She reached across the table and took my hand. And most importantly, you need to accept that your son has made his choice. He chose Esme. He chose her over you, over his own mother. And until he's ready to see who she really is, there's nothing you can do to change that. The words hurt, but they were true. I'd seen it yesterday. Even after everything, Clayton had stood by Esme. What about yesterday? I asked. When you confronted them, did that change anything? Margaret's expression was sad. I drove to their hotel last night after the reception ended early. Clayton refused to see me. Esme sent me a text saying I was no longer welcome in their lives, that I'd embarrassed them both and shown my true colors. I'm sorry, I said. Don't be, I chose this. I chose to finally do the right thing, even if it cost me my relationship with my daughter. I should have done it years ago. We sat in silence for a moment. Finally, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since yesterday. Do you think Clayton will ever realize what she is? Margaret considered this carefully. Maybe. David did eventually. But it took years and it cost him his relationship with his mother. By the time he understood, it was too late to make amends. Rachel was gone. She squeezed my hand. Don't wait for Clayton to wake up, Harriet. Don't put your life on hold hoping he'll come back. Live for yourself. Protect yourself. And if he does eventually see the truth, then you can decide whether to let him back in. 3 weeks passed after my lunch with Margaret. 3 weeks of silence from Clayton. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was like I'd ceased to exist in his world. I tried to move on. Went to work, came home, watched television without really seeing it. Margaret called me twice a week, checking in, making sure I was okay. It was strange having someone care about my well-being who wasn't obligated to. We met for coffee once, and she told me more about Esme's history, about other people she'd heard over the years. Each story made my chest ache for what Clayton didn't know he'd married into. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Clayton's name appeared on the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something made me answer. Mom. His voice sounded strained, tired. We need to talk. About what? I kept my tone neutral, careful. Can I come over? Tonight? I hesitated. Margaret's warnings echoed in my mind. Protect yourself. Don't let them manipulate you. Why now, Clayton? It's been 3 weeks. I know. I need to talk to you. Please. Against my better judgment, I agreed. He arrived at 7, and when I opened the door, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt and pale. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His clothes, usually impeccable, were wrinkled. Clayton, what's wrong? Are you sick? He walked past me into the apartment, pacing like a caged animal. I'm not sick. Everything's falling apart, Mom. I closed the door slowly. What do you mean? He ran his hands through his hair. Money problems, work problems. Esme and I, we're fighting constantly. Everything is just... He trailed off, sinking onto my couch with his head in his hands. Part of me wanted to comfort him immediately. That old instinct, the mother in me that couldn't stand to see my child suffering. But I forced myself to stay where I was, standing by the door. "I'm sorry you're going through a difficult time," I said carefully. He looked up at me, and I saw desperation in his eyes. "That's it? That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say, Clayton?" "I don't know. Something. Anything." "You're my mother." His voice cracked on the last word. "I am your mother," I agreed. "The same mother you laughed at 3 weeks ago when your wife poured garbage on me at your wedding." He flinched. "That was?" "Mom, I'm sorry about that. I got caught up in the moment. Esme said it was just a harmless prank." "Harmless," I repeated. The word tasted bitter. "You recorded it on your phone, Clayton. You laughed while I stood there covered in filth. That wasn't getting caught up in a moment. That was a choice." "I said I'm sorry," he snapped, then seemed to catch himself. He took a breath. "Look, I didn't come here to fight. I came because I need help." There it was, the real reason for his visit. Margaret had predicted this. What kind of help? He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Financial help, just temporary, until I get back on my feet. Esme and I have some unexpected expenses, and my credit cards are maxed out. I thought maybe you could loan us some money. Not a lot. Just $5,000 or so. $5,000. My entire savings account. That's all I have, Clayton. If I gave you that money, I'd have nothing left for emergencies." "I'll pay you back," he said quickly. "With interest. I promise. I just need it now. The rent is due, and if we don't pay, we'll get evicted." I thought about the documents Margaret had shown me. The $4,000 monthly rent on a house they couldn't afford. The lifestyle Esme had insisted on. "Why don't you and Esme move somewhere less expensive?" I asked. "Find a place you can actually afford?" His face darkened. "We can't do that. It would look bad. For my career, for our reputation. We have a certain image to maintain." "An image," I said slowly. "Is that image worth more than your financial stability?" "You don't understand how things work in my world," he said, and there was an edge of condescension in his voice that I'd never heard before. "Appearance matters. The right address, the right car, the right clothes. It all matters. Your world," I repeated. "You mean the world Esme introduced you to?" He stood up abruptly. "Don't start with that. I know what Margaret told you. She called me, trying to poison you against Esme. But you don't know my wife like I do. She's ambitious, yes. She has high standards. But she wants what's best for us." "Is that why you're here asking your mother for money? Because Esme wants what's best? That's not fair." "None of this is fair, Clayton." I felt my voice rising, all the hurt and anger from the past 3 weeks bubbling up. "You want to talk about unfair? I raised you alone. Your father left us with nothing, and I worked myself to exhaustion to give you a good life. I paid for your school clothes, your college application fees, your first car. I never asked for anything back because that's what parents do. We sacrifice for our children." "And I'm grateful," he said, but he sounded defensive now. "I've always been grateful." "No, you haven't. You've been embarrassed. Embarrassed by my small apartment, my modest job, my secondhand furniture. Esme made you ashamed of where you came from, and you let her. That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time you invited me to your house, Clayton? When's the last time you called me just to talk, not because you needed something? When's the last time you defended me?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer. "I loved you so much," I continued, and my voice broke. "I gave you everything I had, and you repaid me by laughing while your wife humiliated me in front of 100 people. You stood there and recorded it like it was entertainment." "I didn't know it would hurt you that much," he said weakly. "You didn't care," I corrected. "There's a difference. You didn't care because Esme had already convinced you that my feelings didn't matter." Clayton's jaw tightened. "You know what? Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe you are jealous of Esme. Maybe you can't stand that I found someone who pushes me to be better, who expects more from me than just being your son." The words landed like a physical blow. "Is that what you really think?" "I think you've never liked Esme. From the beginning, you've looked for problems. You couldn't just be happy that I found someone." "I couldn't be happy because I watched her systematically erase me from your life, Clayton. Every forgotten invitation, every intercepted phone call, every time you canceled our plans because Esme needed something. I watched her take my son away from me piece by piece, and you let her do it. She didn't take me away. I grew up. I moved on with my life. Maybe you just can't accept that. I stared at him, this stranger wearing my son's face, and realized Margaret was right. He wasn't ready to see the truth. Maybe he never would be. I'm not giving you the money, I said quietly. His expression shifted from defensive to shocked. What? I'm not giving you $5,000 so you can continue living beyond your means. I'm not enabling Esme's lifestyle, and I'm not rewarding you for treating me the way you have. Are you serious right now? His voice rose. I'm your son. I'm asking for help and you're going to turn me down? Yes. Because of what happened at the wedding? Because you can't take a joke? Because you haven't apologized, I said. Not really. You said the words, but you don't mean them. You're not sorry for what happened. You're just sorry that it created consequences you don't like. Clayton's face flushed red. Fine. You want a real apology? I'm sorry I laughed. I'm sorry Esme played that prank. I'm sorry your feelings got hurt. There. Happy now? Will you give me the money? No. He stared at me in disbelief. You're really going to do this? You're going to watch your own son get evicted because you're still upset about a stupid prank? You're not going to get evicted, I said. You're going to figure out a solution. Maybe you'll move to a cheaper apartment. Maybe you'll get a second job. Maybe Esme will get a job instead of spending money you don't have. But whatever you do, you're going to do it without my money. I can't believe this. He grabbed his jacket. I came here thinking you'd help me, thinking that despite everything, you'd still be my mom. But I guess Margaret was right about you too. What did Margaret say about me? That you were a victim, that you'd play the martyr and use this situation to manipulate me. She warned me this would happen. I felt a chill run through me. Esme told you that Margaret said those things. Yes, and clearly she was right. Clayton, Margaret never said that. She defended me. She told me about Esme's first marriage, about the pattern of abuse and manipulation. She's trying to protect both of us. Abuse? He laughed harshly. Now Esme's abusive? You're really reaching, Mom. This is pathetic. Ask Margaret yourself, I said. Call her. Ask her what she really said. I'm not calling anyone. I'm done with this whole thing. You, Margaret, everyone trying to turn me against my wife. I came here for help, and all I got was judgment and accusations. He walked to the door, then turned back. You know what the saddest part is? Esme was right about you from the beginning. She said you'd never accept her, that you'd always try to come between us. I defended you. I told her you just needed time, but she saw you clearly all along. Clayton, please, just listen to me for 1 minute. No, I'm done listening. I'm done with you trying to sabotage my marriage. When you're ready to apologize and support my choices, you know where to find me. Until then, don't call me. He slammed the door on his way out, leaving me standing in my small living room, shaking. I sank onto the couch, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. This was it. The final severing. Clayton had chosen Esme completely, and there was nothing I could do about it. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Did Clayton contact you? I called her instead of texting back. When she answered, I could barely get the words out. He was here. He asked for money. I said no, and he told me Esme was right about me, that I'm jealous and manipulative. Margaret, he believes everything she says. I know, Margaret said gently. Esme called me this morning, triumphant. She said she'd finally gotten Clayton to see you for what you really were. She's been working on this for weeks, planting seeds, rewriting history. The request for money was just the final test. A test? To see if you'd cave. If you had given him the money, she would have known she still had leverage over you, that she could control you through Clayton. By saying no, you showed her she can't. But I lost my son, I whispered. You lost someone who was already gone, Margaret said. The Clayton you raised, the boy who loved you, Esme buried him a long time ago. What's left is someone she molded into exactly what she needed. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. How did this happen? How did I lose him so completely? This isn't your fault, Harriet. This is what Esme does. She finds people and hollows them out, replaces their sense of self with what she wants them to be, and she's very, very good at it. What do I do now? Margaret was quiet for a moment. You let go. You stop fighting for someone who isn't fighting for you, and you start living for yourself. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my apartment for a long time. Outside, I could hear traffic, people going about their lives, the world continuing to turn. My son was gone. Maybe not physically, but in every way that mattered, and I had to figure out how to live with that. 8 months passed. 8 months of learning how to breathe without the constant weight of worry about Clayton. 8 months of slowly, painfully, building a life that was mine alone. The first month was the hardest. I kept reaching for my phone to call him, forgetting that we weren't speaking. I'd see something funny or interesting and think I should tell Clayton, before remembering that he'd made it clear he didn't want to hear from me. Every holiday, every Sunday morning, every small moment felt like a fresh wound. But Margaret was right. Slowly, the acute pain faded into something duller, more manageable. And in the space where my worry for Clayton had lived, other things started to grow. I started having lunch with Margaret every week. At first, our conversation centered on Clayton and Esme, but gradually we talked about other things. Her work as a retired professor, my experiences as a nurse, books we'd read, places we wanted to travel. She became something I hadn't had in years. A friend. Through Margaret, I met her book club. 8 women, all in their 60s and 70s, who gathered monthly to discuss literature and life. They welcomed me without judgment, without needing to know my whole sad story. For the first time in decades, I had a social life that wasn't centered around being someone's mother. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned, started painting again, something I'd loved in high school, but gave up when Clayton was born and time became a luxury I couldn't afford. My apartment walls slowly filled with my work. They weren't masterpieces, but they were mine. I even started dating. Nothing serious, just coffee with a man named Robert who I met at the hospital. He was a widower, kind and patient, who understood grief and moving forward. We were taking things slow, but it felt good to be seen as Harriet, not just as Clayton's mother. Work became more fulfilling, too. I requested a transfer to the pediatric ward, something I'd always wanted but never pursued because the hours were more demanding. Now, with no one depending on me, I could take on the challenge. The kids reminded me daily that there was still good in the world, still innocence worth protecting. My life wasn't perfect. Some nights I still cried. Some days I still picked up my phone to text Clayton before remembering. The grief wasn't gone, but it was no longer drowning me. Then, on a Tuesday morning in early spring, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mom? Clayton's voice was barely recognizable. Rough, broken, like he'd been crying. My heart jumped, that old instinct flaring up. Clayton, what's wrong? Can I come over? Please. I need to talk to you. I hesitated, Margaret's warnings echoing in my mind. But this didn't sound like the angry, defensive Clayton from 8 months ago. This sounded like someone shattered. Okay. When? I'm outside your building. I looked out my window and saw him sitting in his car, head resting on the steering wheel. Even from 4 floors up, I could see he looked terrible. When I opened my apartment door, I barely recognized the man standing there. Clayton had lost significant weight. His expensive clothes hung loose on his frame. His hair needed cutting, but it was his eyes that shocked me most. They were hollow, haunted. Come in, I said quietly. He walked in slowly, looking around like he was seeing the apartment for the first time. You painted? Yes, I took up painting again. He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. He sat on the couch, and I sat across from him in the armchair, keeping distance between us. I left her, he said finally. I left Esme. I waited, saying nothing. You were right. About everything. Margaret was right. God, Mom, I've been so stupid. His voice broke and tears started falling. She destroyed me, financially, emotionally, everything. I'm $68,000 in debt. I lost my job 3 weeks ago because I couldn't focus, kept making mistakes. The house is gone, the car is gone, everything is gone. He looked up at me, his face streaked with tears. But the worst part is what I did to you. The wedding, the things I said, choosing her over you again and again. I can't believe I laughed when she poured that garbage on you. What kind of person does that? What kind of son? I felt my own eyes filling with tears, but I kept my voice steady. What changed, Clayton? Why now? He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking. I found these on her laptop. She forgot to log out, and I found messages between her and her friends. About me. About us. He handed me the phone. I scrolled through the messages, each one more damning than the last. Esme. Clayton's so easy to manipulate. Just tell him something is for his career and he agrees to anything. Esme. His mother is finally out of the picture. Took long enough. The garbage stunt worked perfectly. Esme. Once I drain him completely, I'll move on. Maybe find someone with actual family money next time. Esme. David was easier. At least his mother died. Clayton's just won't go away. The cruelty was breathtaking. The calculated manipulation laid out in black and white. There's more, Clayton said. Months of messages. Planning everything. The wedding humiliation. Turning me against you. Even sabotaging my job by making me late to important meetings. She documented everything like it was a game. He put his face in his hands. I destroyed my relationship with my mother because I believed a woman who saw me as a mark, as someone to exploit. How do I come back from that? I set the phone down carefully. Part of me wanted to comfort him immediately, to tell him everything was forgiven. But I couldn't. Not yet. Why didn't you see it sooner? I asked. Margaret tried to warn you. I tried to tell you. Because I didn't want to, he admitted. Esme made me feel important, successful, like I was finally becoming the man I always wanted to be. And accepting that she was manipulating me meant accepting that everything I'd built was a lie, that I'd sacrificed my relationship with you for nothing. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like years. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I can't undo what I did. But Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I took a deep breath. I believe you're sorry, Clayton. I believe you're hurting, but sorry doesn't erase 8 months of silence. It doesn't erase you calling me jealous and manipulative. It doesn't erase you choosing her over me every single time. I know. Do you? Because this isn't the first time you've disappointed me, Clayton. Maybe not as severely, but there's been a pattern. You pulled away from me long before Esme came along. You were embarrassed by me, by my job, my apartment, my life. Esme just gave you permission to act on feelings that were already there. He flinched, but nodded. You're right. I was ashamed. I wanted to be someone different, someone more successful and sophisticated. And I blamed you for not being that, for not giving me the advantages other kids had. I gave you everything I had, I said quietly. I know. And it was never enough for me because I was never enough for myself. That's not your fault. That's mine. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, I could hear children playing in the courtyard, their laughter drifting up through the window. What do you want from me, Clayton? I asked finally. I don't know, he said honestly. A chance to rebuild, maybe? Not immediately. I know I don't deserve that. But someday. When I've proven that I've changed, that I've learned, could there be a someday? I thought about the past 8 months, the freedom I'd found, the life I'd built, the peace I'd discovered in letting go. Maybe, I said carefully, but it can't be like before. I'm not going back to being the mother who sacrifices everything and gets nothing in return. I'm not going back to waiting for calls that never come and making excuses for being excluded. I wouldn't ask you to. And I need to see real change, not words, not promises. Actual sustained change over time, therapy, work on yourself, understanding why you made the choices you did. I've already started therapy. he said. Twice a week. It's part of how I finally saw through Esme's manipulation. Good. Keep going. For yourself, not for me. He nodded, wiping his eyes. Can I ask you something? What? Are you happy? In these 8 months without me? Have you been happy? I thought about Margaret, about the book club, about Robert and our slow, careful dates, about painting and the pediatric ward and Sunday mornings reading the paper without guilt. Yes, I said honestly, I have been. Not every day, but more than I've been in years. Something shifted in his expression. Not hurt, exactly. More like understanding. Good. You deserve that. You've always deserved that. He stood up slowly. I should go. I've taken up enough of your time. Where are you staying? A friend's couch. I'm looking for a cheap apartment, something I can actually afford. I got a new job, entry level, but it's honest work. I'm starting over. I walked him to the door. Clayton, he turned. I do love you. I need you to know that. Even after everything, even with all the hurt, I still love you. But I love myself now too, and I won't sacrifice one for the other anymore. His eyes filled with tears again. I understand. And I love you too, Mom. I don't think I ever really told you enough, but I do. After he left, I stood at my window watching him walk to his car. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe he needed to be broken down before he could rebuild himself properly. My phone buzzed. Margaret. Was that Clayton I saw leaving your building? I smiled despite the tears on my own face. Of course, Margaret had seen him. She lived 2 blocks away and had taken to walking past my building during her morning constitutional. It was. Are you okay? I am. We talked. Really talked. He's left Esme. I know. She's been calling me nonstop, furious that he discovered her messages. Apparently, I'm somehow responsible for teaching him how to check her laptop. I laughed, the sound surprising me. Are you free for lunch? Always. Same place? Same place. I hung up and looked around my apartment, at the paintings on my walls, at the book club selections on my coffee table, at the flowers Robert had brought me last week, still fresh in their vase. This was my life now. Not perfect. Not what I'd imagined when I held baby Clayton in my arms 31 years ago. But mine. The phone rang again. Clayton. Mom, I forgot to ask. My therapist suggested family counseling, if you're willing. No pressure. But if you ever want to try, I'd like that. I looked out the window at the spring morning, at the world waking up and moving forward. Let me think about it, I said. Ask me again in a few months. Let's see where we both are then. Okay, thank you. For not slamming the door in my face. I wouldn't do that. I know. That's what makes you a better person than me. After we hung up, I texted Margaret. Change of plans. Let's have lunch at that new place by the park. I feel like celebrating. Celebrating what? I thought about how to answer. Celebrating survival? Celebrating freedom? Celebrating the fact that I'd made it through the worst year of my life and come out stronger? Celebrating me. I finally typed. Margaret's response was immediate. It's about time. I got ready slowly, carefully. Put on the new dress I'd bought last week, the bright blue one that Margaret said brought out my eyes. Applied makeup with a steadier hand than I'd had in months. Looked at myself in the mirror and saw not a broken mother, not a victim, not someone waiting for her son to need her. Just Harriet, 64 years old, a nurse, a painter, a friend, a woman who'd survived betrayal and come out the other side. Maybe Clayton would change. Maybe in time we'd rebuild something real and healthy. Or maybe he wouldn't, and I'd continue building this life I'd created without him. Either way, I'd be okay, because for the first time in my adult life, my happiness wasn't dependent on being someone's mother. It was dependent on being myself, and that was more than enough. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.